If they're real, how come we don't have any bodies? I mean, like, come on, really? We've all heard this tired old wheeze about 100 million times each. It's the power whine of the desperate, who don't care to do any thinking of their own, but just wish to parrot the words of others who probably haven't done any thinking either. This essay will not keep anyone up reading late tonight, just simply because it does not take long to address the topic and move on from there. It is somewhat akin to a discussion on toilet paper. 1 ply or 2? Well, I guess that about covers that subject. Next. This old complaint has been around for ages, in one form or another, and it is time to give it a decent funeral and lay it to rest. Yes, I realize that he who needs to read this will not be he who actually does read it, but perhaps it will serve as ammunition for those who wish a solid, logical explanation of the response to this. First, in a peer-reviewed paper related to me by Dr. Jeff Meldrum, professor of anthropology and anatomy at Idaho State University, Pocatello, Idaho, he stated, of all hominid species who have ever lived, 92% of them have not left any traceable evidence. Over 9 in every 10 species who have ever existed do not show up in the archaeological records of Earth. Indeed, it is the extreme minority who have done so, less than 1 in 10. Even a species so common and familiar to us as the chimpanzee has no archaeological record of his existence. None. Sasquatch people live in social organizations similar to our own. Each living unit or clan we will find from 15 to 18 individuals and is comprised from 1 to 3 families. The number of clans in a given area will be determined by the carrying capacity of that land. Carrying capacity is a term borrowed from wildlife managers, but it's quite appropriate in this usage. Basically, it means how many can it feed and house. As is intuitively correct, for in a hunter-gatherer society, no more can live in an area than can be fed there at the worst time of the year. For most species, this is the early spring. The game animals are at their worst, and there is no quality vegetative material left available to the populations. Even the early peoples found that a longer, more harsh winter meant lean to starving times ahead. In addition to the natural limitations placed on the available food and cover, a diminishing commodity as well due to the encroachment of people into the less populated areas, the Sasquatch community itself polices its own numbers. These intelligent beings understand the ramifications of overpopulation to an even less extent than what humans are overpopulated. These beings understand that if their population was inordinately elevated, it would be impossible to remain hidden and safe in their environment when safety is required most. It rapidly becomes obvious that their safety resides in a smaller, stable, and controlled population. But what to do when one of our family dies? If these were the unintelligent, dumb animals that some seem to think they are, they'd simply do what other unintelligent, dumb animals do. Leave them where they fall. Feel some remorse, perhaps. Weep and wail and gnash of one's teeth, even if so moved. But move the body? Does a bear remove the body of a fellow bear? Does one moose mourn another? In fact, is there any animal in North America other than man who does so reverence their past family members? If there is, he is certainly not well known. But there is one besides Homo sapiens sapiens, and that is Homo sapiens cognati, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. In 2004, I had the extreme pleasure to spend a length of time on Alaska's Prince of Wales Island. During that sojourn, I had the experience of observing a Sasquatch funeral ritual and burial in the backwoods where I had been led while on a dry stalk of a rather large black bear, Ursus americana, which grow in such great profusion there. I am not, even at this late date, permitted to discuss the event deeply. Suffice to say, I saw it. And I learned how it is done in their society. For our purposes here, it is enough to simply know it does occur. Also, it occurs in a manner and method so as to render the resultant grave as to be wholly unrecognizable after the ceremony is complete and the soils have regained their natural colorations and textures. For those who have read Autumn Williams' book, Enoch, the fellow Michael in there describes the funeral as well. It is a fact, not a dream, but perhaps each has to learn that for himself. But suppose, what if this were not the case? What if the Sasquatch people did not formally bury their dead? Would it significantly alter the chances of finding a body of a deceased Sasquatch? How many bodies of cougars have we found in our lifetimes? How many dead bears have I found laying in the woods? Yes, a few deer and elk from time to time, but not many for the sheer numbers that live there. After all, there are millions upon millions of deer and elk in North America. Experiments at the University of North Carolina have shown that a full deer carcass will last no more than a week in the field. Remarkably, and perhaps not expected, it is the tiniest of species who create the most wastage. Yes, the large scavenger animals will feed on the carcass left, but it is the maggots, the flies, the worms, and other insects and larvae that devour the bulk of the mass and almost all of the heavy bones. The heavy acid soils of the far west are no different in how they attack left-behind animal waste, nor are the alkali soils of the intermontane west. Thus we see that our task of finding a body is made difficult because our subjects bury their dead. Add to that difficulty the fact that soils are inimical to bodies, and we begin to see the beginnings of our problems. So far, we have been reviewing creatures with populations from the millions. What about our Sasquatch friends? I have spent a number of years researching population figures beginning in my home state of Washington. I began with the two areas I was most familiar with, the Olympic Peninsula in far western Washington and the Blue Mountains of southeastern Washington. By judicious investigations, I was able to discern that there were three separate and distinct clans that inhabited the area of the Blue Mountains from approximately Interstate 84 in northeastern Oregon and the Snake River in southeastern Washington. Since we know there are 15 to 18 individuals per clan, this yields us a general population for this region of between 45 and 54 beings. Knowing the life expectancy to be very close to 100 years, we can arrive at some conclusions for this area to a fair degree of confidence. with 50 individuals living an average of 100 years each. That means that one will pass on in the region outlined by the Interstate 84 on the south, north of the Snake River, and extending from the Pendleton, Oregon to Walla Walla, Washington north-south line, east to the Idaho border. One individual on the average will die every 2 years. Think about that. It somewhat tends to boggle the mind, doesn't it? What does that do to one's body hunting plans? Let us expand our scope somewhat by adding the Olympic Peninsula, the Willapa Hills, North and South Cascade Mountains, and the northern tier of counties. And we raise our total to approximately 18 to 20 clans for the entire state of Washington, with some of those being shared with the neighboring states of Idaho and Oregon, as well as Canada. This now yields an approximate total of 320 individuals for the entire state of Washington. Using our same logic here, in the entire state of Washington, just over 300 individuals who live a nominal 100 years, which means that each year approximately 3 individuals die in the entire state. In an area of over 71,000 square miles, in a given year, there will be 3 bodies to be found, if they were not buried, which they are. Now, what is our task like to locate one of these departed souls? Does anyone know how to answer the Yahoo who asks why we don't find a body? Now, this said, what is to say that we do not have such remains? Since the beginning of the 19th century, in the great mountains of the Adena peoples that stretch from Florida to the Great Lakes, from the eastern seaboard to the Mississippi River, and in the caves of the West, skeletons of giant Indians from 7 to 10 feet tall have been exhumed. Many under the auspices of trained, qualified archaeologists and paleontologists, and shipped to the Smithsonian Institute in the East and the Bancroft Library at the University of California in Berkeley, California, only to have them mysteriously disappear without record or trace. If they were truly Indian remains, why would they not have been studied and quantified? Would there have been any reason why 150 years ago science would not have been fascinated by the subject? No. The only reason for such a blatant oversight was that these people recognized the fact that they were not dealing with a pure human species. But there was something new and separate. In the name of sustaining their view on their religion, or any number of other reasons, they were destroyed. Collusion? Conspiracy? Probably. But one dare not speak of it openly. Only that truth has not been well served.